Hello there, I'm Father George Salzman at the Harvard Catholic Center here at St. Paul's Parish. We're literally in St. Paul's Church in Harvard Square at the corner of Bow and Arrow off Mount Auburn Street. And we're here by the window amid the four great doctors of the Western Church of St Augustine. The famous 20th century philosopher and physician Karl Jaspers called him the greatest experiencer of all time. He was a very bright kid, came from a small village, St Augustine, now Souk Aras, in North Africa, and then he went to the larger city with scholarships from friends, got an education, but then finally decided to go to Rome. His mother, St. Monica, getting an eye of this, followed him to the top of Africa, the southern shore of the Mediterranean, and prevailed upon him not to leave, and he agreed, he promised he wouldn't, and he left her in a chapel to St. Cyprian, where she was praying the night. And then the next lines, you can't make this up, the next lines in his Confessions, his autobiography years later are, "The wind blew and filled our sails, and the shore disappeared from sight. And where was my mother, my God, but on the shore in the morning light, pouring her aggravation into your ear, that you had not listened to any of her prayers, but you had answered her prayers in a way far better than she could ever ask or imagine, by making me a faithful Catholic Christian at long last." He was still taken up with various cults and so on, and so he went to Rome, he taught there for a bit, and then finally he went to the head of empire in the west, which was then up in the north of Italy in Milan. And the way to get ahead, the civil service exam then, was rhetoric. And the finest rhetorician of late antiquity was the Bishop of Milan, Ambrose, the famous doctor of the church, Ambrose. And so he would go free of charge and listen to Milan Cathedral to understand and better his own rhetoric, his own skill. But gradually, he who had been skeptical of Christianity and fallen for every cult that there was, gradually he came to understand the essence, not the dressing of the rhetoric of Ambrose, but the very kernel of his message, that Christianity was the grain, the wine, and the oil, the things essential to life, the whole of the center of the human heart, which only Christ and God's love in Christ can fill. So then we come to that famous scene in late August, when his feast day is, in the church calendar, late August of 386, he's there in the garden of Milan, and he's beginning to break down, realizing how empty his life is. And he doesn't want his friend to see him breaking down, so he goes to another part of the garden, the walled garden. He hears a kid shouting, "Totally lazy, take up and read, take up and read." Has no idea what game that could be or what that could mean. But it does remind him there's a book of St. Paul's epistles he left there, and he picks it up. And the first passage his eyes fall on, Romans 13:13 and 13:14, all his doubts go away. And so then he goes for, as we call it today, RCIA, as a catechumen in Milan Cathedral with Ambrose, and then he's baptized. That was 386. Now in 387, he's baptized Easter, Holy Saturday night. He's baptized by Ambrose in Milan Cathedral. He wrote 10 years later, he looked back on his life and he saw God's hand at every turn. The providence of God, as far as Augustine would run away from him, that God would be running after him, Augustine, faster still. And so he wrote up his life, and that marvelous story, many people consider it the finest autobiography of all time, the Confessions. And there in the first book, the first chapter, the end of the first paragraph, he has an incomparable line, which we could meditate on for all the days of our lives. Quia tu fecisti nos ad te, Domine, you've made us for yourself, O Lord, et inquietum est cor nostrum, our hearts shall ever be restless, donat requiescat in te, until they rest in you. And so you see him with the human heart in his hand, the heart on fire with love of God.